Greetings. I'm calling this an extension of lecture. Most of the lectures you've witnessed prior to this point have included some sort of demonstration to help you understand the concepts, some sort of sample problem that you could work that would be similar to the homework problems you were expected to complete on your own. The recent lecture on inventory was a bit more conceptual than usual and didn't include such a demonstration. I'd like to work an exercise with you now to demonstrate to you some of the things that you'd be expected to master and understand in this particular topic. In Monday's lecture, as a quick recap, we talked about the importance of inventory, about determining inventory, about getting the right amount, about not overlooking anything, about not counting anything twice. And the importance was because whatever number we got affected both of the financial statements. The ending inventory figure directly affected the balance sheet. That's the number we're going to use to report to others. And that left the remainder of the box to be reported on the income statement. That amount was the amount that would be determined to be cost of goods sold. In Monday's lecture, we also talked about the assumptions that we make regarding the way costs flow. We talked about FIFO, LIFO, and average as being possibilities that we might use to assign the costs to the inventory. The impact of those, the first good in being the first good out and being reflected on the income statement as cost of goods sold, or under the FIFO assumption, the first good goes to the income statement, therefore the most recent unit goes to the balance sheet in ending inventory, merchandise inventory. Under the LIFO assumption, we would expect the opposite to be true, that income statement information would be the most recent information. The latest items would be part of cost of goods sold on the income statement. Therefore, if there is an ending inventory, if there is merchandise inventory, it would be assumed to be the amounts from the oldest items, the ones acquired earliest. And in a period of rising prices, those assumptions, extreme, FIFO and LIFO, would have direct influence on the amount shown on the balance sheet and income statement. As we mentioned in lecture already, FIFO would give you larger ending inventory numbers than LIFO would on the balance sheet as merchandise inventory. FIFO would give you smaller cost of goods sold than LIFO would. And the ultimate impact would be that net income would be greater under FIFO than it would under LIFO. Now, I'd like for you to experience that. I'd like for you to see that and be able to prove it. The impact, truly, to try to bridge the gap between this conceptual presentation, what might be presented in the textbook, and the actual practice in real life, would be, let's consider the invoices stored away in a file drawer. If we have been filing those away chronologically, in other words, if the oldest items are at the front and the most recent items are at the back, then we need to know how to determine and assign the costs to the inventory under these various assumptions. If we are using FIFO, would we start at the front of the drawer and work toward the back, or from the back of the drawer and work toward the front to assign the cost to ending inventory? Or under LIFO, if we're trying to find ending inventory, would we start at the front of the drawer and work back, or would we start at the back of the drawer and work toward the front? Those are the questions that we need to know. Now, in addition to that, we also need to know what we're looking for. What's the question? Are we asked to find ending inventory, or are we asked to find cost of goods sold? Those two factors, what are you looking for, ending inventory, cost of goods sold being point 1, and which method are you using, point 2, are the extremes. We need to know how what the question are, what the two factors in the question are, in order to be able to get the right answer. Under the FIFO assumption and under the LIFO assumption, you could be asked either question. You could be asked to find ending inventory or cost of goods sold. Under the FIFO assumption, ending inventory is at the back of the drawer. The first good in is gone. It's part of cost of goods sold. If any goods remain, they're the most recent items. They're the ones at the back of the file drawer. That's ending inventory. It's still true, to get the right answer under FIFO, LIFO, the extremes, you need to know what you're looking for. What is the question? And which method are you using? If the LIFO assumption is what you're instructed to use, then LIFO is going to assign cost of goods sold from the most recent purchases. The last good in is the first good out. The items at the back of the file drawer are gone. If any goods remain, they are at the front of the file drawer. They are the items that represent ending inventory. Now, with that in mind, let's work a problem together, an exercise together, where we could see those numbers come true. There's a handout that is to accompany this presentation. I hope you have your hands on the handout. I hope that you'll read it with me, and the sooner you can make decisions on your own instead of just following along here, the sooner you do the thinking and the processing and the calculating and use this presentation to verify your numbers and build your confidence, the better off you're going to be. The ideal time to see this is after lecture, before you work your first homework problem. If that's not your timeline, you should still benefit from this. You should be able to benefit from seeing this presentation and making these calculations with me. Read the handout with me. In its first month of operations, AC Company made 3 purchases of merchandise in the following sequence: 300 units at 6, 400 units at 7, 300 units at 8. Assuming there are 450 units on hand, compute the cost of the ending inventory and cost of goods sold under the FIFO method, the LIFO method, and the average method. Our company uses the periodic inventory system. So, one of the things I'd like to do is look at just the prices. The quantities were acquired for $6, $7, and $8. I'm hoping that you'll assume with me, see from the facts with me, that this is a period of rising prices. And we talked about in Monday's lecture and in this presentation the predictions that we could make on the impact of merchandise inventory on the balance sheet and cost of goods sold and therefore net income on the income statement of this impact of rising prices determined by the extreme positions FIFO and LIFO. FIFO and LIFO will give you extremely different results. You've heard me present it twice. Here are the summaries that you should be able to conclude at some point this week. I'd like you to be able to reason through and come up with these conclusions. That FIFO merchandise inventory is going to be larger than LIFO. That cost of goods sold under FIFO is going to be smaller than under LIFO. That net income will be larger under FIFO than under LIFO. But that's just memorization. I'm going for understanding at this point. I would love it to if you could see this and know that it would be true in this demonstration and be able to remember it because of what you're about to experience. So let's take the information in the handout that 300, 400, and 300 units were acquired at these various prices, and let's make the extensions. Let's multiply it out and see how many goods we have available. I bet you can do the math in your head. 300 times 6 is $1,800. 400 times 7 is $2,800. I hope you're working them out in your head. Come on, do it with me. 300 times 8 is $2,400. Now let's sum. Let's do 300 plus 400 plus 300. There's 1,000 units that we're working with. And let's do the extended amounts. 1,800 plus 2,800 plus 2,400 is 7,000. What name shall be given these totals? 1,000 units cost us $7,000. This was a brand new company. It says in the problem, in the first month of operations, beginning inventory 0, plus 3 items, plus 1,000 units purchased on 3 different occasions, is goods available for sale. goods available for sale is $7,000. Now, you should know by now, this is our third week on inventory. You should know by now that only two things can happen to those goods. We either sold them or we didn't. And we chose at the cash register to not account for these goods sold. Therefore, we have to take inventory, and we are now in the process of attempting to assign a cost. So let's look in the handout again and see if we can't come up with how many goods there are on hand. We took inventory and we've determined, the problem says, 450 units are on hand. If there are 450 units on hand, the question is, do we start at the bottom of the list and work up, or do we start at the top of the list and work down? These are very good questions. The other way to say that is, do we start at the front of the drawer and work back, or do we start at the back of the drawer and work forward? Today, in this presentation, we've talked about the FIFO assumption. FIFO says the first goods in are gone. If any goods remain, they are at the back of the file drawer. To find ending inventory, that was the question. To get this right, you need to know what the question is and what method you're using. If it's inventory for which we're looking and we're using the FIFO assumption, we're to look at the back of the file drawer, which translates to the bottom of the list. We're going to start at the bottom of the list and work up until we find the cost of these 450 units in ending inventory. Let's start. The very bottom item is 300 units, for which we paid $8 each. 300 times 8 is $2,400. Now we're looking for the remainder. We're looking for 450 total. I need 150 more. I'm moving up the list until I find those 150. Now here's a whole batch that cost me a batch of 400 that cost me $7 each. I only need 150 of them to come up with the 450 in inventory. I'm going to value these 150 in inventory at $7 a piece. 150 times 7 is $1,050. Now let's sum those two amounts. 300 at 8, $2,400. 150 at 7, $1,050. That sum is $3,450. Ending inventory under the FIFO assumption is $3,450. Let's write that back where we left space to predict these. Back on the handout in instruction number 2, we wrote down our predictions. And that could be the outline for the remainder of this presentation. You could time yourself. You could know how we're doing on this by completing these and filling in these blanks with me. So we now know our first answer. The FIFO ending inventory is $3,450. And the problem says, calculate ending inventory and find cost of goods sold. Well, one thing I want to point out is that in real life, all we would do is find ending inventory. The rest of this is rather academic. We're wanting to prove it. We're wanting you to understand better. We're wanting to show you where all the goods are being accounted for. But in real life, it is only ending inventory for which we're attempting to make this calculation. We can find cost of goods sold by realizing that goods available for sale minus ending inventory is cost of goods sold. We knew goods available for sale was 7,000. The easiest, fastest, most direct way to find this is to subtract that ending inventory valuation that we just determined from the 7,000 and get cost of goods sold. We just assigned $3,450 of cost to ending inventory. Goods available for sale, 7,000, minus ending inventory, $3,450, is cost of goods sold, $3,550. $3,550. Let's write that down and prove it. Let's prove the cost of goods sold calculation. Now, we've got all these goods available. And under the FIFO assumption, we started at the bottom of the list and worked up to find ending inventory. Well, if we're trying to find cost of goods sold, we're going to start at the top of the list and work down. Let's start at the top of the list and work down and find the units that were sold. So we are going to start with the 300 units that were sold from the first item. 300 cost us $6 a piece. That's $1,800. We need another 250. Remember this 400 batch that was split? We've already assigned 150 of those to ending inventory. The rest of those 250 are part of cost of goods sold. They were sold. 250 cost us $7 each. 250 times 7 is $1,750. That sum of $3,550 is the cost of 550 units which were sold. That $3,550 is the same number we got when we use the formula we recite. Goods available for sale minus ending inventory was $3,550. We got it two different ways. Cost of goods sold under the FIFO assumption is $3,550. If you haven't already, write that on your handout, and let's keep up with these extremes. Ending inventory, cost of goods sold, FIFO and LIFO. Let's see how the extremes compare. Reread the instructions with me. We're to find ending inventory and cost of goods sold FIFO. We did it. And ending inventory and cost of goods sold under the LIFO assumption. Let's turn our attention to that. It starts with the same basic facts we established at the beginning of this demonstration. We have 1,000 units that cost us $7,000, goods available for sale. We want to know which of these should be assigned to the items in ending inventory. The problem says there are 450 units in ending inventory. Let's decide whether we should start at the bottom of the list and work up, or at the top of the list and work down to determine the cost of these units. Well, this is ending inventory, LIFO. You need to know those two facts. If you don't think about those two facts, there's a chance you're going to miss this, and I don't want you to miss it. You need to decide the impact of those two things. It's ending inventory for which we're looking, and it's the LIFO assumption. Well, LIFO stands for last in, first out. The goods at the bottom of the list are gone. If any goods remain, they're at the top of the list. If we're to use the file drawer analogy that I tried to establish at the beginning of this, the items at the back of the drawer are gone. They're cost of goods sold. If any goods remain, they're at the front of the drawer. The oldest items are still on hand, assumed to be on hand under the LIFO assumption. Ending inventory is to be determined from the oldest item in the front of the drawer, from the top of the list. 300 units at $6 each this time is $1,800. Now I need 150 additional units to get me to the 450 we've determined that is in ending inventory. Those 150 units are to be valued this time at $7 a piece. That $7 is from that middle purchase, the second purchase. 150 at $7 a piece is $1,050. $1,800 from the first batch, $1,050 from this batch, means that ending inventory under the LIFO assumption is $2,850, $2,850. We should write that on our handout. So we've got ending inventory under the LIFO assumption, and compare that number to the number we got a minute ago. A minute ago, we got ending inventory to be $3,450 under FIFO. We predicted that this number would be smaller than, that LIFO would give us a smaller number than FIFO. Sure enough, we got $2,850 this time. That number's significantly smaller than the first answer under FIFO. Our predictions are coming true. Let's find cost of goods sold under LIFO. Cost of goods sold under LIFO can be determined the easy way based on the formula we're to know by now. Goods available for sale minus ending inventory is cost of goods sold. Goods available for sale, $7,000. Minus ending inventory we determined this time to be $2,850 is cost of goods sold of $4,150. We could write that number down. We will have another opportunity to do that in a moment as well. $4,150 we should be able to prove. Now, we wouldn't do this in real life. We're only doing it because this is an academic exercise attempting to get you to understand the problem better. Let's prove this by taking these items in goods available for sale and deciding, do we want to start at the top of the list and work down, or the bottom of the list and work up? That has to do with that file drawer analogy. Do we start at the front of the drawer and go to the back, or the back of the drawer and the front? And that depends on two things. It depends on what you're looking for. In this case, cost of goods sold. And which method you're using. In this case, LIFO. So the question becomes, under the LIFO assumption, what is the cost of goods sold? Under the LIFO assumption, what is cost of goods sold? Where do we start? It's at the bottom. Last in, first out. We've got 300 units for which we paid $8 each. That's $2,400. And to that, we want to add enough units to get us up to the 550 that we sold. It takes 250. 250 units at $7 each is $1,750. That sum, 2,400 plus 1,750, is 4,150. We determined cost of goods sold under the LIFO assumption a moment ago to be 4,150. We should write that as a result on our handout. 4,150, cost of goods sold under LIFO, compares to FIFO's answer a little while ago. How? Our prediction was that FIFO would be less than LIFO. The real numbers are, FIFO was 3,550, LIFO is 4,150. Our prediction came true. This is a period of rising prices. That should be true. Those extremes should be true. The instructions of the problem ask us to calculate these two things, ending inventory and cost of goods sold, under the FIFO assumption, the LIFO assumption, and the average assumption. We've done FIFO and LIFO. Let's turn our attention to the average assumption. Under the average method, our first task would be to find the average itself. And technically, the name of this method is weighted average. One way to determine the average here would be to sum 6 plus 7 plus 8, the unit cost, and find a simple average. Won't work. Sorry. We want to weight this. The amounts that we determined will have greater influence. If we acquire a lot at that price, it will have more of an influence. It's a weighted average. It's based on goods available for sale, all the units that we purchased, and the total price that we paid. The average formula is goods available for sale divided by units available for sale. All the price we paid, all the dollars we paid, divided by all the units we purchased. Goods available for sale is $7,000. Units available for sale is 1,000 units. That's an average price of $7 per unit. An average price of $7 per unit. And that average is to be applied to both calculations we're making. That average should appear on the balance sheet as ending merchandise inventory. That average price should directly affect the cost of goods sold determination that we reflect on the income statement. It determines both financial presentations. Let's determine ending inventory. 450 units in ending inventory at the average price of $7 a piece is $3,150. Now, let's write that on our handout. Let's see how that compares to other answers. Average should be someplace in between, someplace in the middle. So the extremes were FIFO was $3,450 and LIFO was $2,850. This number we just determined, $3,150, is someplace in between. We ought to write that on the handout and see that it falls between the other two extremes, FIFO and LIFO. Let's determine cost of goods sold. The way we've been doing it for 2 weeks now is goods available for sale minus ending inventory. Goods available for sale, 7,000. Ending inventory we just determined to be $3,150 under the average amount. Cost of goods sold should be $3,850. $3,850 belongs on the handout if you're keeping score. But the instructions are to find it and prove it. And we've talked about the average price being both balance sheet and income statement valuation. On the income statement, cost of goods sold should be at the average price, $7 each. In two previous situations, we've determined there were 550 units sold, 1,000 available, 450 not sold, 550 sold. Those 550 units should be valued at $7 a piece. 550 times 7 is $38.50. That's the same amount we got a moment ago when we used the formula method. So we should see that $38.50, the value of ending inventory, is someplace between. But bigger than that, you should also see that average price of $7 is the amount we're using for balance sheet and income statement presentation. The average amount determines both. I hope this has been beneficial for you. I hope that you'll use the opportunity to understand your homework better, and I hope you'll choose to do other exercises that would be recommended and would also be useful to you. The more you do it on your own, the better you'll understand it. Have a great day.